Welcome to Creating a Professional Roadmap, brought to you by SeasonalPathways.com. We hope you enjoyed today's free webinar, and if you do, stay tuned for more and take a look at our course options. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is the dream. You know, we all have this hunger inside to dream. The dreams that we have are stage-wise as well. Our dreams when we were an emerging leader are very different than the dreams we have as an advancing leader. And certainly the dreams I'm having today as a repurposed leader are somewhat different than when I was a young emerging leader. So what you need to really focus on here is not so much what your end goals are, especially if you are an emerging or advancing leader, but what your next step dreams are. There's so much going on now in your lives, especially with the aftermath of COVID and what we have to do in this field to get staff, to get your business back to where it was pre-COVID time or whatever. So some of that, the dreams you might have had prior to then and the dreams that you actually have now might actually even be a little different. You might have some outcomes that you're looking at that are a little different. So I would suggest to begin with sitting down. Remember, we talked about all that journaling, and this is still going to have a piece of that, where you have this notebook that you sit down and just write your thoughts. So you're in this season, whatever season you've identified in your leadership, and there's a hunger inside you somewhere to move forward, to move on, to move up, whatever. What is that hunger? Is it to lead more? Is it to just have better leadership? Is it to have a different kind of leadership? Is it to pass on leadership? If you could really just think more and more about that. And one of the ways to do that is to free write. So if you have a tablet or a journal and you just start writing, if you don't think about it, just, put pen to paper, or even you can even use your phone. Because I live up in the mountains in Colorado, I am often having to drive into town. And one of the things that you can do is you can put your cell phone up and put the record button on. Just start recording your thoughts. What are your desires? Where do you want to go? How do you want to do these things? And just don't even worry about sentence structure or anything like that. Just start sharing your thoughts. One time I was trying to think of a series of articles that I wanted to write. And from the time that I left my home in the mountains to the time I got down to the foot of the mountains, which is about 20 minutes, I had 52 ideas that came up. So there's a lot of thinking that you can do when you're in the car. Just press record, like we talked about. So what are the dreams that you have for your leadership? This is a time to not even try to put any kind of parameters on it, because what you might find that actually as you go through the process that comes out at the end could be very different than the dreams you started with. Once you have that information kind of plotted on paper or in a recording of some sort, you need to start identifying kind of what that really means, or what are some of the things that you might need to do in order to make that work. I have an acronym that I put together probably 20 years ago, and it's called ICE: Identify, Clarify, and Execute. And those are the three things that when I get frustrated, I go back to all the time. And I'm going to incorporate that in this as well. But when I want something, when I want to do something, when I want to achieve something, that's the process I try to make myself go back and think about. Identify what it is, what I need to do to get there, clarify who it's going to help, who it could hurt, what are the markers or the milestones that it might take, and then how am I going to execute it? How am I going to get it done? What's it going to look like when it's done? So this is the next step. After that first original just brainstorming and dreaming, identify some of the dreams that you have by taking some time to just let it germinate. Think about it. The other thing that I find when we are giving ourselves some time to do this is we spend a little bit more time thinking through a thought or a dream, and we find out it's not really what we want to do. It doesn't sit well in our gut, or it's too much work, or it doesn't validate really what I want to do in the future. It'd be fun, but the value is not quite there. So this is a time to kind of sift through those dreams, again, using your personal belief system, your knowledge, your education, all those things, and identify maybe what comes out of that. The next step is to clarify. So now you've dreamed about what you want your leadership to maybe entail, to look at, to be more of, to be successful in. You've identified a little bit more clearly what it is that you want to focus your attention on. And the clarification now is about what specifically do you want from it? So sifting even a little bit further. And this is a time to think too about what it would take to really achieve this. The very first time I did this process, I was a young assistant director, and I really had achieved, I had come to the place where in my city, I was in a little small town in Washington State. I had pretty much achieved all I could achieve in that state. And I was trying to think about if I stayed in this field, because this was not my field of choice. I fell into this field. If I was to stay in this field, what would I want to do? And I did some dreaming. I thought about, well, I would want a bigger platform than just this little town. And I would actually like to travel. I'd like to speak a little bit more. I would like to do training. I would like to have a beautiful office. You see how your dreams go? They just get bigger and bigger. I'd like to have staff that help support me do things. And what I did is I sat down and realized if I wanted to have that grandiose dream, here's what I would need to do. Well, number one, I was going to need to finish my education. Well, because at that time you had to have, a degree to be the kind of leader that I was looking to be. Okay, I wrote that down. Well, I was going to have some more experience doing more training, and it had to be something on a bigger scale than just in my little city. I wrote that down. So as I kept breaking down what I would like with what it would take to get there, I came up with some very clear identifiers of what I would need to do and what that would look like. So some of those that I ended up achieving were, I did go back to school. It took me a long time to get my bachelor's degree because I did it with my family, not in spite of my family. I did it during a time when I had already lost my mom and my dad was ill. So I had to take care of my dad and my younger brother. Life's not easy for anybody. Everybody has their own story. But I didn't give up. And that is actually a story that has been encouraging to other people. You don't have to give up. You just keep plodding through and eventually you'll get there. Just a side note, first person in my family to graduate from high school, let alone college, let alone have a graduate degree. So am I proud of that? You bet I am. The other thing that I clarified was that I was going to need to have more experience. So I did more training in my local city that caught the eye of somebody that was in a regional situation, and had me do some training for them. They had me come out and do things on a national situation. This took a few years, mind you. I ended up being the director during part of that time. And then the day came when the vice president of this national organization said, we want you to come out to Colorado and interview for a position that we have. And it would be both national and international. And it would be training. And they just outlined all these things that were about my dream. And so, long story short, I ended up getting the position. And not only that, when I arrived and I had this beautiful office, they told me, oh, now don't worry about this because we're getting rid of this furniture. We're buying you brand new furniture. Then they moved the office to one that had this beautiful view of Pikes Peak. And they gave me staff. They helped me create a magazine. I mean, it went on and on and on. So what I'm saying is this process really works. It's not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. But if you keep your focus on it, and I'll tell you something else, I wrote all this stuff down between the dream and identifying and clarifying. I wrote it down. I don't know where it is today. I didn't look at it a lot, but just the action of thinking through, writing it down, thinking about it now and then, it always stayed in the back of my mind. I knew what I needed to do in order to get where I wanted to go. So yes, it works. Identify what you want, clarify what it's going to take, and then you need to execute it. The next stage is research. So when I clarified that I was going to need to get, more education, that I needed to have more experience doing the things that I wanted to do on a greater scale, I really needed to research. And, this is before Google was really, really, really big. So while it was out there, it still didn't have the same connections. Now the connections are amazing. You can do anything you want to do. Again, you Google it, you find out where it is, you make sure it's within your, your system of trust, and then you go for it. And that is, certainly what I needed to do in that situation. I had to research where I wanted to go to school. And you know what? We had a local college, a 2-year college in our area, but at the time we did not have a 4-year college. I could have gone to Seattle, but I would have had to, pay to stay up there. So you have choices. Life is full of choices, but it's a matter of researching what all your choices are, what is best for you, and then plugging that choice in. Then it is about planning. This is the number one area that I find people seem to be able to dream and identify and clarify and even research pretty well. But it's the planning aspect of things that I think is where the biggest stumbling blocks begin. It's hard to know, where do you start? How do you plan? Life is so busy with what you already have. How do you fit all of this stuff into an already busy life? And there's a lot to the whole planning thing. And I'm actually creating another webinar, if you will. It'll be an on-demand one that's going to help you go into more depth with that. And so does this webinar to some extent. Because you really have to understand the whole process of planning, what it entails, how to be strategic. And it can't be just about plugging things in your calendar. Time management says we're going to plug in because today we're going to do this, and at this time we're going to do that, and we're going to put that on the calendar. And then guess what? Somebody walks in who's got a cut and is bleeding like crazy. Or somebody calls and says, I can't work today. Or somebody calls and says, I quit. Or there's something that's always grabbing your attention. Or maybe you look at your phone and you see somebody you haven't talked to in a while has called you, and you make the choice to call them back. It is so hard to manage your attention nowadays that it takes a complete different strategy than it used to take in dealing with time management. Probably the most important thing I could suggest as far as planning goes, and the number one place to start, is to commit to finding me time. And what I mean by that is go in your calendar and block out an appointment with yourself. When we say to somebody, I can't meet with you at that time because I have an appointment, they respect that. If you say, I can't meet with you then because I'm planning to do some work on this, they'll say, oh, you can do that anytime. There is no respect for the time you plan for yourself. And when you give yourself some me time, and even if you have to start work, let's say 15 minutes early, go in, shut your door. Side note, research is really talking a lot now about your closed door time rather than your open door policy. You know, in previous years, we used to talk a lot about having an open door policy so your staff could come in and talk to you about anything they needed to talk to you at any time because they needed your support. And while there is some truth in that still, and you definitely need to have some open door time, you must, do you hear that word? You must have some closed door, uninterrupted time. So I'm not going to spend more time talking specifically about how you create a strategic plan. You can either Google that, or you can certainly, stay tuned, because we're gonna have more on that for you. But what I do want to say is, when you are creating your plan, be strategic in thinking about what has to happen first, what comes next, when can you do it, and then also coming up with some kind of a criteria that says, I am going to commit to doing this today. Now, it might be that you're going to have to stay later, come earlier. If something interrupts that time, you plan for it. But the more you commit to yourself to actually achieving a part of that plan that day, that time, the more likely you're going to be able to move through this process and achieve your roadmap. Okay. And then we're going to go into the whole phase of execution. I love that term. When I first really became aware of it, it was with the book. It was called Execution, The Art of Getting Things Done. But it's so funny because the first time I used it, people thought I was talking about, cutting off somebody's, executing somebody. But execution really is about getting things done. It's about intentionally working through a process. One of the things James Clear says, and I think y'all know right now, James Clear and Atomic Habits is, one of my, extra Bibles there. But one of the things he says is, you do not rise to your goals, you fail to your systems. And I think we can say our processes are part of that as well. So if you really want to get through this whole pathway, if you really want to achieve, you want to raise your leadership and really be an influencer, and really want to be able to make a difference in people's lives, you really need to know how to execute your plans, your process. So in the first stage, it's very motivating. In our first stage, we're kind of excited about getting started, about creating a new process, about spending time on it and whatnot, and implementing some of the things that we've learned. It's very much like the emerging leader. You're pretty excited about things. But then you get into phase two. Phase two is when you start, you have a few stumbling blocks. You can think about roadblocks that on your pathway to getting to where you want to go, your destination, and there's a roadblock there, and you've got to find a detour. And sometimes that detour takes time. You've got to find a new map, a new road to get there. Sometimes it's just a roadblock that says, stop, wait, slow down. You're not going to go through this yet. Nothing that you do without thinking it through, being intentional, is really going to be as worthy as what you would do if you give it the time to process and do what you need to do to make it good. We're also looking now towards that an exit strategy, something that we prepare for a smooth transition. A lot of times when we're creating these road paths, what we're doing is we are transitioning from what we used to do to what we are going to be doing in the future. And so there is a phase there of exiting an old way of doing things, or exiting away from a system into a new system. And a lot of times that does not consist of only you, it consists of other people that's going to impact as well. So you have to kind of think through all of that. And stage 3 is when that pathway is really in sight. And so now we have to figure out, how are we going to communicate with other people about where we are, where we're going, what tomorrow's going to look like. And depending on what stage you're in, that is very different for each stage. Sometimes if you're going to transition from an emerging leader to an advancing leader, a lot of times that communication is done by somebody else. It might be a supervisor saying, hey, we're going to be promoting so-and-so, and we're all excited about what she's going to do and those kind of things. But when you get towards the advancing leaders, that might be, I'm going to a different school, or I'm going into a different field. If it's a owner in a repurposed situation, it could be, I'm selling the business, or I am, leaving the day-to-day operations and we're going to bring a CEO in. Those kind of communications are very timely in how they have to happen. So again, what you say and when you say it can be detrimental, or it can be really exciting. And it really depends on when and how you execute the conversations.